No one noticed the moment Russell Vaughan's life split in two. It didn't happen with a celebration. It didn't come with applause. It happened in a feed store that smelled like dust and grain, with a man being told no for the 100th time. Russell stood there anyway, 47 years old, hands cracked from frost, boots worn thin at the heel, the kind of rancher stories people stop telling because they think they already know how it ends. But this one doesn't. Because 10 minutes later, Russell would walk out with a horse no one wanted. And that mistake would quietly rewrite everything. Walter, the feed store owner, kept his voice low, not out of kindness, out of embarrassment. "Russell, I can't extend your credit again." Russell nodded before the sentence even finished. He'd learned how to nod early, nod when the bank called, nod when the equipment dealer stopped returning messages, nod when people said, "Tough times don't last." His account was $340 past due. The bag of feed on the counter weighed 50 pounds, and it might as well have been 1,000. "I just need enough to get Rex through the week," Russell said. Not begging, not demanding, just stating a fact. Walter sighed. I know, but I've got suppliers breathing down my neck too." Russell turned toward the door empty-handed, already calculating which fence he could sell, which tool he could pawn, which promise he could break next. That's when the shouting started. "I'm done with that horse." The voice cut through the store like a slap. Russell paused. A well-dressed man in his 50s stood near the back, red-faced, finger stabbing the air at Danny Fletcher, the boarding stable owner from the edge of town. Danny looked like a man who hadn't slept in days. "You want him?" the man barked. "Keep him, sell him, send him to the killers. I don't care anymore." The word killers landed heavy. Russell felt it in his chest before he understood why. Danny rubbed his temples. "Mr. Winters, you owe $4,200 in back boarding fees. I can't keep feeding a horse for free." The man scoffed. "That horse was my ex-wife's mistake. Draft horses are useless. He's too big, eats too much, can't race, can't show, can't do a thing that makes money." Russell slowly turned. Draft horse. His grandfather had ploughed half the valley with one before tractors arrived. Danny lowered his voice. "Legally, the horse is in your name. You have until tomorrow at 5 to settle the bill. After that, state law allows me to sell him, or worse." "Then do it," Mr. Winters snapped. "I'm done." The store went quiet. No one moved. No one said what everyone was thinking. A draft horse was about to disappear because someone decided he wasn't worth feeding anymore. Russell's heart started pounding, and he didn't know why. He told himself it wasn't his business. He told himself he couldn't even afford feed for his own horse. He told himself to keep walking. But rancher stories don't start with logic. They start with instinct. "Danny," Russell said, surprising even himself. Both men turned. "I can't pay cash," Russell continued, "but I can trade." Danny frowned. "Trade what?" Russell glanced back at the counter. "At the feed." Walter stiffened. "1 bag," Russell said carefully. £50. I'll cover the cost with labor, fence repair, stall cleaning, whatever you need." The room stayed silent. Mr. Winters laughed. "You want that useless animal? Be my guest. He'll eat you out of house and home." Danny studied Russell's face. Not the clothes, not the truck outside, the eyes. "You understand what you're taking on?" Danny asked. Russell nodded once. "I do." Danny exhaled slowly. "If you take responsibility for him today, I'll clear the paperwork." Walter shook his head. "Russell." "I know," Russell said softly. "I know." The paperwork took 5 minutes. The feed bag slid across the counter. And just like that, Russell Vaughan, broke, behind on loans, 1 bad week from losing everything, became the owner of a draft horse no one wanted. He didn't know the horse's full history, didn't know the breeding line, didn't know why his eyes looked the way they did. All he knew was the name Danny mentioned as he handed over the lead rope. "His name's Atlas." Russell would remember that name for the rest of his life. Because within a year, that useless horse would be the reason the bank stopped calling. Within 3 years, people would drive hours just to see him work. And before the town understood what had happened, Atlas would be worth more than everything Russell had ever owned combined. But none of that was visible yet. All Russell saw was a massive shadow in a stall, breath steaming, eyes calm, waiting, And the moment he stepped inside, everything changed. 3. The first thing Russell noticed wasn't Atlas's size, it was the silence. Most horses shifted when someone entered a stall, stamped, snorted, tested. He just stood there, massive, still watching. Russell paused at the threshold, hand resting on the rough wood of the stall door. Something about the horse's calm felt heavier than fear, like restraint, like a storm choosing not to break. "You've been through it, haven't you?" Russell murmured. Atlas flicked one ear. That was all. Danny hovered behind him. "Careful," he said. "He's not aggressive, just withdrawn. Big horses like him don't get second chances." Russell nodded, stepping inside slowly. He didn't reach out right away. His grandfather had taught him that. Let them decide first. Atlas's breath rolled out in slow, steady clouds. The horse was enormous, 18 hands if he was an inch, but leaner than he should have been. Hips sharp, ribs just starting to show. Neglect didn't always look like violence. Sometimes it looked like indifference. Russell felt something twist in his chest. "You eat like a king now," he said quietly. "Even if I don't." Danny cleared his throat. "I'll walk you through the paperwork." Outside, the feed store door slammed. Mr. Winters was gone. So was the argument. So was the past. But the consequences were standing right in front of Russell. They loaded Atlas into Russell's trailer just before dusk. People watched. They always did in small towns. A few shook their heads. A few whispered. One man muttered, "That horse will bankrupt him." Russell heard it. He always heard it. The drive home was slow. The trailer creaked with every turn. Russell kept checking the mirrors like he was afraid Atlas might vanish if he looked away too long. By the time he pulled onto his land, the sky had gone iron gray. His farm wasn't much anymore. A sagging barn. Fields that used to grow hay now dotted with stubborn rock. Equipment older than Russell himself. Atlas stepped down from the trailer without hesitation. No spook. No panic. Just weight settling into earth. Russell exhaled without realizing he'd been holding his breath. "You'll do," he said. The first night, Russell gave Atlas half of Rex's feed and went without dinner himself. The second night, he did the same. By the third, he'd stopped counting. Atlas didn't waste a grain. He ate like a worker, methodical, grateful without desperation. Rex, the old quarter horse Russell had raised from a colt, watched from the adjacent stall, ears forward, curious but calm. The two horses never pinned ears, never challenged, like they understood something together. The next morning, Russell tried to harness Atlas, not to pull, just to see how he'd respond. The moment the leather touched his flank, Atlas stiffened, not violently, internally. His breathing changed. Russell froze. "Easy," he whispered. "I'm not here to hurt you." Minutes passed. Atlas didn't move. Finally, Russell stepped back and removed the harness completely. "That's fine," he said. "We'll wait." Most people wouldn't have. That's why most people never would have seen what came next. Weeks passed. Russell worked odd jobs to keep feed coming. Fence repairs, snow clearing, anything that paid in cash. Atlas gained weight. Muscle filled in where hollowness had lived. His coat darkened, gleaming even under weak winter sun. But Russell noticed something else. Atlas watched everything. When Russell fixed fences, Atlas tracked the lines. When he stacked hay, Atlas followed the rhythm. When Rex moved, Atlas mirrored the motion without being taught. One afternoon, a logging crew cut through the valley road. Their equipment stalled on a muddy incline. Chains snapped. Engines screamed. Russell stood at his fence, watching. Atlas stood beside him. Without thinking, Russell said, "You could do that." Atlas's ears flicked forward. Russell swallowed. It was a stupid thought. A desperate thought. Draft horses were old news. Machines had replaced them decades ago. That's what everyone said. But rancher stories were built on what everyone else forgot. The next day, Russell walked Atlas out with a simple lead. No harness, no pressure, just presence. They reached the fallen oak at the edge of the field. The one Russell had never managed to move. Russell wrapped the chain loosely, not tight enough to pull, just enough to ask. Atlas shifted his weight. The ground trembled. Russell's breath caught. Atlas leaned forward. Not hard, not fast, controlled. The oak slid, just an inch. Russell staggered back like he'd been punched. He stared at Atlas. Atlas stood still again, waiting. That was the moment. The exact moment Russell realized the town had been wrong. Not about the horse, about what useless really meant. Because Atlas wasn't useless. He was unused. And once word spread, once people saw what Russell had seen, there would be no stopping what came next. But first, Russell had to survive long enough for anyone to notice. And the bank wasn't done with him yet. The letter came on a Tuesday, the worst kind of day for bad news. Russell recognized the envelope before he opened it. Thick paper, official seal. The kind of mail that never brought relief. Final notice. He didn't read the rest right away. Instead, he folded the letter and tucked it into his coat, as if ignoring it might soften what it said. Outside, Atlas stood at the fence, breath fogging the air, watching Russell cross the yard. Rex lifted his head from the hay. 2 horses. 1 man. And not enough money to keep any of it. The bank had given him 30 days. 30 days to pay $18,000 or lose the land his grandfather had carved out with his hands and a mule. Russell sat on an overturned bucket and laughed once. A dry sound. "Guess it's your turn to earn your keep," he told Atlas. Atlas didn't flinch. That afternoon, Russell drove into town and did something he'd sworn he'd never do. He asked for help. Not money, work. The logging crew was still around, hauling timber from the ridge. Russell approached their foreman, a thick-shouldered man named Cole. "Your skidder's tearing up the access road," Russell said. "I've got a horse who can pull those logs cleaner than any machine." Cole snorted. "A horse?" "Draft horse," Russell corrected. "And I'll do it for half what your fuel costs." Cole looked past Russell at the trailer, at Atlas's broad chest, at the calm, intelligent eyes. "You break that animal, you pay for the delay," Cole said. "1 shot." That was all Russell needed. The next morning, the crew gathered along the tree line. Phones came out. Smirks followed. Russell worked slowly. No whip, no shouting. Just pressure, release. Atlas leaned into the harness like he'd been waiting years for permission. The first log slid free without tearing the earth. The second followed smoother. The third came faster. By noon, the crew was silent. By dusk, Cole handed Russell an envelope thick with cash. "You available tomorrow?" he asked. Russell nodded. Word spread faster than Russell expected. A farmer needed stumps cleared without damaging soil. A conservation group needed selective logging done by hand. A vineyard owner wanted erosion control without machinery. Atlas worked with precision that machines couldn't match. And people noticed something else. The horse didn't spook, didn't strain, didn't fight, he thought. Within 2 weeks, Russell had more work offers than he could take. But money wasn't the only thing changing. A man named Harold Becker pulled into Russell's drive one evening in a clean pickup. He stepped out wearing polished boots and a practiced smile. "Beautiful horse," Harold said. "Belgian cross?" Russell shrugged. "Don't know." Harold chuckled. "Well, I do. That's rare stock. Strong bone. Exceptional temperament. I represent a breeding operation." Russell felt his stomach tighten. "How much?" Harold asked. Russell didn't answer. Harold named a number anyway. $25,000. For a horse Russell had traded for a bag of feed. Russell looked at Atlas. Atlas looked back. "No," Russell said. Harold raised an eyebrow. "Name your price." Russell shook his head. "He's not for sale." Harold's smile faded. "Everything's for sale." "Not this," Russell replied. That night Russell couldn't sleep. $25,000 would have wiped the bank clean, saved the land, changed everything. But something in Atlas's eyes told him selling now would be a mistake. And mistakes were expensive. The next week, a state agricultural inspector arrived unannounced. Complaints had been filed. Claims of unsafe working conditions, improper harnessing, animal welfare concerns. Russell knew exactly where they came from. Harold didn't like hearing no. The inspector circled Atlas, clipboard in hand. "Mind if I run some tests?" he asked. Russell nodded. Minutes passed. Then the inspector frowned. "This horse hasn't been pushed," he said. No stress markers, no microfractures, no inflammation. He looked at Russell sharply. Where did you get him? Russell hesitated. From someone who didn't know what he had. The inspector closed his clipboard. I suggest you keep it that way. As the truck disappeared down the road, Russell exhaled. But the danger wasn't over. Because when powerful people realize you're sitting on something valuable, they don't always try to buy it. Sometimes they try to take it. And Russell was about to learn that the hard way. The first offer wasn't the problem. It was the second one. Russell found it taped to his barn door early one morning, folded crisp like it belonged somewhere cleaner than his weathered boards. No name, no greeting, just a number written in ink so dark it looked pressed into the paper. $100,000. Russell stared at it for a long time. That kind of money didn't drift into rancher stories by accident. It came with strings and teeth. Atlas shifted behind him, hooves scraping softly against packed earth. Russell crumpled the paper and tossed it into the stove without a word. The flames swallowed it fast. 2 days later, a man arrived in a black SUV. He introduced himself as Martin Hale, no relation, and didn't bother pretending he was there for small talk. I represent several private buyers, Martin said, eyes never leaving Atlas. Horses like this don't come along often. He's working, Russell replied. That's all. Martin smiled thinly. Not for long. There's a national pulling exhibition in Pennsylvania next month. Winner's purse alone is $500,000. Russell froze. Atlas flicked an ear. You think someone like you belongs there? Martin continued. They'll eat you alive. Insurance, transport, registration. It's not cheap. Russell leaned against the stall door. What are you offering? A partnership, Martin said smoothly. You sign him over for competition rights. We handle the rest. You get a percentage. Russell didn't need time to think. No. Martin's smile vanished. You're making a mistake. Then it's mine to make. Martin nodded once and left without another word. That night Russell slept in the barn. Not because he was afraid, because Atlas was restless. The horse shifted more than usual, ears turning at every sound. Russell trusted that instinct. Just after midnight, headlights crept along the edge of the property. Russell stood slowly. The beam swept across the field, then stopped. A truck door opened. Russell grabbed the old flashlight and stepped outside. Can I help you? He called. The light snapped off. The engine revved. By morning, the gate at the north fence lay twisted on the ground. Someone had tried to load Atlas and failed. Russell filed a report. Nothing came of it. The sheriff shrugged. No witnesses, no damage beyond the gate. But Russell understood the message. He was being tested. The next week, Russell received a call from a professor named Eli Warren, an agricultural engineer from a nearby university. I've been studying low-impact logging methods, Eli said. Your horse's efficiency numbers are unusual. Russell raised an eyebrow. Unusual how? His power output relative to heart rate defies most models. I'd like to run a full assessment. Russell hesitated. Exposure was dangerous, but hiding forever was impossible. The tests were conducted quietly. Pull resistance, recovery time, muscle fiber density. Eli stared at the results in silence. This horse isn't just strong, he said finally. He's efficient, almost perfectly balanced. Russell swallowed. What does that mean? It means someone bred him for work that doesn't exist anymore, Eli replied, which makes him priceless. The words echoed, priceless. Not just to buyers, to industries. Within days, emails started arriving, sustainable forestry groups, historical agriculture societies, even a documentary crew. Russell declined them all, because something felt off. Atlas had started stamping at night, not in fear, in warning. Then the bank called again. The deadline had been moved up. 2 weeks, no extensions. Russell sat on the barn floor, letter in his hands, heart pounding. He could sell Atlas, save everything, or he could risk it all on one chance, one event, one pull. If Atlas performed the way Russell believed he could, they wouldn't just survive, they'd change the rules. Russell looked up at the massive horse standing over him. Do you trust me? He asked softly. Atlas lowered his head until their foreheads touched. The decision was made. Russell would enter the Pennsylvania pull. Not as a novelty, as a statement, and whether he liked it or not. The whole world was about to watch. The paperwork alone almost stopped him. Entry fees, health certifications, transport permits, insurance riders with numbers so large Russell had to read them twice. Every system was designed to keep men like him out. Russell sat at the kitchen table long after midnight, calculator blinking, coffee gone cold, Rex snoring softly outside the door. 2 weeks. That's all the bank had given him. If he failed in Pennsylvania, there would be no farm to come back to. He sold the old hay baler first, then the spare trailer, then a rusted tractor that hadn't run in years, but still carried his grandfather's initials scratched into the frame. Every sale hurt, but none of them hurt like the silence from Atlas. The horse sensed the pressure. Russell could see it in the way Atlas watched him now, steady, focused, as if waiting for instructions that mattered. The night before they left, Russell slept in the trailer. Not because he was afraid of thieves anymore, because he didn't trust himself to be alone with his thoughts. The drive to Pennsylvania took 12 hours. Every mile felt heavier than the last. At the competition grounds, Russell almost turned around. Massive rigs lined the lot, polished chrome, corporate banners. Teams wearing matching jackets stitched with sponsor logos. Atlas stepped down from the trailer quietly, heads turned. People stopped talking. Draft horses were common at pulls, but not like this. Atlas wasn't fat, wasn't overworked, wasn't drugged or pushed to bulk. He was balanced. A man near the registration booth squinted. "Where'd you get that one?" Russell shrugged. "Feed store." The man laughed. He wouldn't be laughing long. The first pull was light. Qualifying weight meant to weed out amateurs. Atlas leaned in. The sled moved like it had been waiting. No jerking, no strain. Just power applied exactly where it mattered. The crowd clapped politely. Russell wasn't impressed. Neither was Atlas. The second round increased resistance. Horses began to fail. Muscles locked. Hooves dug ruts. Handlers shouted. Russell said nothing. Atlas pulled clean. By the third round, whispers spread. By the fourth, phones came out. A judge leaned forward, eyes narrowing. "Who trained that horse?" someone asked. Russell wiped his hands on his jacket. "No one," he replied. "He just remembers." The final round was brutal. Most competitors scratched out. Only 3 horses remained. Atlas stood beside Russell, breathing steady. Russell rested a hand on his neck. "Just like the oak," he murmured. The sled operator glanced at Russell. "You sure?" Russell nodded. The horn sounded. Atlas stepped forward. The ground shook. The sled crawled. Halfway, then farther still. Silence fell across the arena. Atlas didn't stop. He finished the pull clean. When the horn blew again, the crowd erupted. Not polite applause. Real noise. The kind that rattled your ribs. Russell stood frozen. The announcer's voice cracked over the speakers. "We have a new record." The prize money alone cleared Russell's bank debt. But that wasn't what changed everything. It was what happened after. 3 men approached him behind the arena. No logos, no smiles. One extended a card. "Consortium for Sustainable Agriculture," he said. "We want exclusive rights to Atlas's working profile." Russell frowned. "Profile?" "Data," the man clarified. "Motion patterns, load tolerance, efficiency modeling." Russell looked at Atlas, then back at the man. "No." The man's jaw tightened. "You don't understand what you're sitting on?" Russell did understand, and that's why he said no again. That night, Russell checked his phone. Missed calls, emails, offers climbing by the hour. One message stood out. Private sale offer, $1,200,000. Russell stared at the screen. One horse, one decision, one yes away from walking away rich, or one no away from something bigger than money. Atlas shifted in the stall. Russell turned off the phone. Because the moment you sell the miracle, you stop being part of it. But powerful people don't accept no easily. And the next move wouldn't be an offer. It would be pressure. The pressure didn't arrive all at once. It came in layers. The first was polite. An email from a legal firm Russell had never heard of, written in language so smooth it almost sounded friendly. They wanted to discuss asset optimization. They offered consultants, protection, representation. Russell deleted it. The second layer was louder. A journalist tracked him down 2 days later, camera already rolling before Russell could shut the barn door. "Is it true you turned down over $1 million for a single horse?" the reporter asked. Russell blocked the lens with his hand. "This is private property." The clip aired anyway. By nightfall, Russell's name was everywhere, not famous, exposed. People drove past the farm just to look. Some waved, some parked too long. Atlas didn't like it. The horse started pacing the fence line, ears pinned toward the road. Russell posted hand-painted signs. "No trespassing. Private farm." They didn't slow anyone down. The third layer came disguised as help. A man named Thomas Rell, former executive, clean smile, expensive boots, arrived unannounced. "I grew up on a ranch," Thomas said, glancing around with practiced nostalgia. "I respect what you've built here." Russell crossed his arms. "You've got 5 minutes." Thomas nodded. "My partners believe Atlas represents the future of low-impact agriculture. We want to license his work methods." Russell stared at him. "You mean copy him?" Thomas didn't deny it. "We'd compensate you generously." "How generously?" Thomas named a number that made Russell's chest tighten, then added, "Plus lifetime care for the horse, best facilities, no risk." Russell shook his head slowly. "You'd put him in a lab." Thomas sighed. "You're emotional, that's understandable, but emotion doesn't scale." That sentence did it. "Get off my land," Russell said. Thomas paused at the gate. "You can't protect him forever." That night the power went out, not the whole valley, just Russell's farm. Russell grabbed the shotgun he'd hoped never to use and stepped outside. Atlas stamped once, hard. A shadow moved near the south fence. Russell shouted. The shadow ran. By morning the fence had been cut clean, not vandalism, preparation. Russell called Eli Warren, the professor, before sunrise. "They're escalating," Russell said. Eli was quiet for a moment. "I was afraid of that." "What do I do?" Eli exhaled. "You make it public, fully, on your terms." Within 48 hours, Eli helped arrange something no one expected. A live demonstration, on record, on camera, with witnesses who couldn't be bought quietly. The location, a protected forest reserve facing erosion collapse. The task, remove deadfall without damaging root systems. The audience, conservation officials, press, independent scientists, and Atlas. Russell felt sick as they drove there. If Atlas failed under this scrutiny, everything would collapse. The demonstration began at noon. Atlas moved like he always did, slow, deliberate, precise. Trees shifted without tearing soil. Roots stayed intact. Ground remained stable. The data screens lit up, heart rate steady, load distribution optimal, recovery nearly instantaneous. A murmur spread through the crowd. This wasn't a stunt. It was proof. By evening, the footage was everywhere. But so was something else, a claim. A filing submitted quietly that morning by a holding company Russell had never heard of. They alleged Atlas was the product of proprietary breeding stock, that Russell had no legal right to exploit him. Russell read the notice 3 times. "They're trying to take him," Russell said, voice flat. Eli nodded grimly. "They don't want the horse. They want control of the idea." Russell looked at Atlas standing calm amid the chaos. "They won't get either." The court date was set, 2 weeks out. Russell didn't have lawyers like they did. He had evidence, witnesses, and a horse that had already rewritten the rules once. But this time, strength alone wouldn't be enough, because the fight was no longer about money. It was about ownership, and the people on the other side never lost, until now. The courtroom smelled like polish and paper. Russell noticed that before anything else. Not dust, not hay, not sweat, nothing familiar. Atlas wasn't allowed inside, of course. He stood in a reinforced trailer outside the county building, monitored, documented, guarded like evidence instead of a living thing. Russell hated that part most. Inside, the other side filled the benches. Tailored suits, quiet confidence. Men who spoke in murmurs because they were used to being obeyed. Their lead attorney, a man named Victor Hale, didn't look at Russell when court was called to order. He didn't need to. Victor began calmly. "Atlas is not a coincidence," he said. "He is the result of a controlled lineage, selectively bred under a discontinued but proprietary agricultural program. Russell felt the air thin. Victor continued, projecting charts, documents, contracts from decades ago. A program abandoned publicly but maintained privately. This horse represents intellectual property. Russell's attorney, court-appointed, overworked, underpaid, rose slowly. "And where," he asked, "is your proof that my client knew any of this?" Victor smiled faintly. "Knowledge is irrelevant when profit is involved." That word echoed. Profit. Russell's turn came. He didn't wear a suit, just a clean jacket and boots he'd polished himself. He told the truth. How Atlas had come to him, how no one wanted the horse, how no one claimed him until money appeared. He described the oak log, the erosion test, the pull. Victor stood for cross-examination. "You didn't breed Atlas," Victor said. "No," Russell replied. "You didn't design his genetics." "No." "You didn't invent what makes him valuable." Russell met his eyes. "I recognized it." A ripple passed through the room. Victor pressed on. "You've made significant income from this animal." "Yes." "So you admit exploitation?" Russell shook his head. "I admit partnership." Victor frowned. "What's the difference?" Russell didn't answer immediately. Then he said, "Exploitation breaks things. Partnership keeps them whole." Silence. The judge leaned forward. Witnesses followed. Danny Fletcher, the stable owner, testified under oath that Atlas had been scheduled for disposal. The feed store owner confirmed the trade. Eli Warren presented data showing Atlas had never been overworked or altered. Then came the surprise. An elderly man named Samuel Corbett took the stand. Former agricultural researcher, former employee of the very program Victor referenced. Samuel's voice shook, but not from fear. "That program didn't fail," Samuel said. "It was buried. Because it proved machines weren't always better." Victor objected. The judge overruled. Samuel continued. "The horses bred under that project were sold off quietly. No ownership restrictions, no follow-up." He looked directly at Russell. "This man didn't steal anything, he rescued it." The judge called for a recess. Outside, Russell leaned against the courthouse wall, shaking. Atlas stamped once inside the trailer, as if he knew. When court resumed, the judge spoke carefully. "The claim of ownership is unsubstantiated. The horse remains legally Russell Vaughan's." Russell's knees nearly buckled, but the judge wasn't finished. "However," he continued, "the economic implications raised here are significant." Victor smiled slightly. Russell's heart sank. "The court strongly encourages mediation." Translation: They weren't done. Victor approached Russell afterward. "You won the horse," he said quietly. "But you can't stop what he represents." Russell looked past him, toward the trailer. "Watch me." Because the real shift didn't happen in court. It happened 3 days later, when a federal agricultural initiative announced a pilot program based entirely on Atlas's public data and named, unexpectedly, the Vaughan model. Russell stared at the press release in disbelief. They hadn't taken the horse. They'd changed the system. And the same people who tried to erase him were now desperate to be part of it. But one final choice remained, a choice that would decide whether Russell became rich or something far rarer. The offer came in a sealed envelope, not by email, not by courier, by hand. A man in a plain jacket left it at the gate without knocking, like he didn't want to be seen. Inside was a single sheet of paper. No logos, no legal jargon, just a number written clean and deliberate, $5 million. Russell sat at the kitchen table for a long time. $5 million, enough to walk away forever, enough to buy land, equipment, peace, enough to turn a lifetime of struggle into a footnote. Atlas stood outside the window, framed by fading light. Russell folded the paper carefully and slid it into a drawer. Not yes, not no, not yet. The Vaughan model spread faster than anyone predicted. Universities requested partnerships. Conservation districts requested demonstrations. Farmers requested training. And Russell said yes to everything that kept Atlas working, not owned. He insisted on one rule. No horse would ever be pushed beyond willingness. No model would replace judgment. No data would be separated from context. It frustrated investors. It energized workers. Men who had been pushed out by machines started calling again. "I heard you got a way back in," one said. Russell didn't hire fast. He taught. Atlas became the center of something bigger than competition. Not a spectacle, a standard. The night before the first Vaughan model training session, Russell returned to the drawer. He took out the envelope. $5 million was still $5 million. But something else had arrived in the mail that morning. A handwritten note from a young rancher in Montana. "Because of what you did, they didn't sell my grandfather's land." Russell closed his eyes. That was the moment he knew. The next day, Russell walked into a press conference no one expected. Cameras flashed, microphones crowded. He stood quietly until the noise settled. "I'm declining all private sale offers," Russell said. Gasps followed. "This horse isn't a product," he continued. "He's a partner. And what he's shown us belongs to everyone willing to do the work." A reporter shouted, "You're turning down generational wealth." Russell nodded. "I already inherited something better." That night, Atlas collapsed in his stall, not violently. Suddenly, Russell heard the sound and ran. Atlas struggled to rise, breath uneven. A veterinarian arrived within minutes. Exhaustion, hidden strain from years before Russell had met him. The vet looked at Russell carefully. "You did everything right," he said, "but time always collects its due." Russell sat with Atlas through the night, holding the massive head, listening to the breathing slow. At dawn, Atlas stood again, weaker, but alive. And Russell understood. The Vaughan model had to change. Atlas could no longer carry it alone. The work had to be passed on, because the greatest mistake would be turning a miracle into a dependency. And Russell still had one final decision to make. Not about money, about legacy. Russell announced the change quietly. No press release, no interviews. Just a meeting in the barn with the men who had learned beside him. Atlas stood nearby, resting more now. Weight shifted carefully, eyes still sharp. "We're done proving," Russell said. "Now we're building." Some of the men looked uneasy. "The Vaughan model doesn't survive if it depends on one horse," Russell continued. "It survives if it depends on judgment." He unveiled the plan. A cooperative, no single owner, no private patents. Training programs tied to land stewardship, not profit targets. Draft teams bred and raised locally, adapted to terrain, not standardized. Atlas would no longer pull competitively. He would teach. Demonstrations only, short sessions, plenty of rest. The reaction surprised Russell. No one argued, because every man in that barn had already seen what overuse did to good things. Over the next year, the change rippled outward. Small farms stabilized, erosion slowed, fuel costs dropped, and something else happened. Banks adjusted. Loan structures began factoring Vaughan model certification. Land once marked high risk became viable again. Russell received an invitation to speak at a national summit. He declined. Instead, he sent Eli Warren. "Data should speak," Russell said, "not faces." Atlas spent more time in the pasture now. Kids from nearby farms visited. They learned to approach slowly, to wait. One afternoon, Rex, old, graying, lay down for the last time beneath the maple tree. Atlas stood beside him until the sun went down. Russell buried Rex himself. Atlas watched. That winter, Russell received another envelope. Not an offer, a statement. The holding company that had sued him had quietly dissolved its agricultural arm. They were pivoting, machines again. Russell smiled once, because systems that ignored patients always circled back to the same mistake. And Atlas? Atlas grew older, slower, but never forgotten. One spring morning, Russell woke to silence in the pasture, the kind that tells you before you see. Atlas was lying down, peacefully, gone. Russell didn't call anyone. He sat with the horse until dusk. Then he did something no one expected. He didn't sell the land. He didn't memorialize it. He turned the pasture into a training ground. Because stories like this weren't meant to end with grief. They were meant to continue through others. And there was still one final truth left to tell. They buried Atlas on the highest point of the field. Not with stone, not with a marker, just a young oak. Russell pressed the soil down with his hands and stood there a long time afterward, listening to the wind move through the valley. No crowds came, no cameras. The world had already taken what it needed. Years passed. Russell aged the way land does, quietly, honestly. The Vaughan model became standard practice in more places than anyone predicted. Not everywhere, just where people cared enough to slow down. Russell never became a millionaire on paper, but his debt never returned. Neither did desperation. Young ranchers stopped by often. They asked about Atlas. Russell told the story the same way every time. "I didn't save him," he'd say. "I just listened." One autumn morning, Russell stood in the feed store again. Same smell, same counter. Walter, older now, rang up a bag of grain and slid it across. "On the house," Walter said. Russell smiled. Outside, a team of young draft horses waited in the trailer, strong, calm, unremarkable to anyone who didn't know how to look. Russell loaded the feed and paused, because the richest part of this story was never the money. It was the moment a man who had nothing chose partnership over profit, and in doing so, changed everything.